6 haunted locations where people actually disappeared. Before we expose the most terrifying haunted locations in history, places so supernaturally dangerous they've made entire families vanish without a trace and forced government agencies to quietly seal off areas from public access, smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell. What you're about to discover about real documented disappearances at locations with centuries of paranormal activity will forever change how you see abandoned places and understand why some areas have been permanently evacuated by authorities who refuse to explain why. If these reality-shattering revelations about people who walked into haunted locations and were never seen again disturb you as deeply as they've disturbed the search and rescue teams who can no longer enter these areas, drop that like button to help expose these suppressed truths. When haunted places claim their victims. In the world of paranormal investigation, most haunted locations are considered relatively harmless, places where spirits might move objects, create cold spots, or produce strange sounds that frighten visitors, but don't cause permanent harm. However, there exist documented haunted locations, so supernaturally dangerous that people who enter them simply disappear forever, leaving behind no trace except their abandoned belongings and the terrified testimony of witnesses who watched them vanish into thin air. These aren't urban legends or campfire stories. These are real places with documented histories of making people disappear. Locations where search and rescue operations have been permanently suspended after too many rescuers themselves went missing. Government agencies have quietly cordoned off these areas, officially citing environmental hazards or structural instability, while internally acknowledging that certain locations pose supernatural threats that conventional law enforcement cannot handle. The pattern is always the same. Individuals or groups enter these haunted locations, often despite warnings from locals who know the area's dark history. Witnesses observe them walking into specific areas of these sites, and then they simply cease to exist. No bodies are ever found, no distress calls are received, and no evidence of struggle or accident is discovered. The people just vanish as completely as if they had never existed, leaving behind only the haunted location's growing reputation for claiming victims. What makes these disappearances so terrifying is that they occur at places with extensive paranormal activity documented over centuries, suggesting that whatever supernatural forces inhabit these locations have evolved beyond simple haunting into active predation. These aren't passive ghost sightings. These are hungry supernatural entities that lure victims into dimensional voids from which no one ever returns. Location 1. The Hoia Baciu Forest, Romania's Triangle of Death. In the heart of Romania lies the Hoia Baciu Forest, a 250-hectare woodland that locals call Poiana Blestimata, the cursed clearing. Since the 1960s, over 200 people have entered this forest and never emerged, making it statistically the most dangerous paranormal location in Europe. The forest's supernatural reputation is so well established that the Romanian government has installed permanent monitoring stations around its perimeter, officially to study unusual electromagnetic phenomena, but actually to track who enters and confirm they never come back out. The disappearances began in 1968 when military biologist Alexandru Sift entered the forest to collect plant samples and was never seen again. Search teams found his equipment scattered throughout the woods, but no trace of Sift himself. What made the disappearance particularly disturbing was that his collection notes, found days later, documented increasingly bizarre plant mutations and described feeling, watched by intelligences that exist between the trees. The most documented disappearance occurred in 1987 when a team of 5 paranormal investigators from the University of Bucharest entered Hoia Baciu Forest with full video documentation equipment. Their cameras recorded everything normally until they reached the forest central clearing, where all electronic equipment simultaneously malfunctioned. The final footage shows the investigators walking toward a circular area where no vegetation grows, and then the recording stops abruptly. Rescue teams found the investigators' equipment arranged in a perfect pentagonal pattern around the clearing, but the 5 researchers had vanished completely. Their personal belongings were undisturbed, their food supplies were untouched, and their vehicles remained locked in the parking area. Romanian authorities classified the investigation and sealed the footage, though leaked segments show what appears to be the researchers walking into a shimmering distortion in the air before disappearing entirely. Dr. Adrian Patrut, a biologist who has studied Hoia Baciu forest for decades while maintaining safe distance from the central clearing, documented that the forest exhibits impossible biological characteristics. Trees grow in perfect spirals. Vegetation shows radiation-like burn patterns despite no radioactive sources, and the central clearing maintains a perfect circle of dead earth that resists all attempts at cultivation or natural regrowth. The supernatural activity in Hoia Baciu forest isn't limited to disappearances. Locals report seeing faces in photographs that weren't visible when the pictures were taken, experiencing severe anxiety and nausea when approaching the central clearing, and witnessing UFO-like lights that seem to emerge from underground sources within the forest. Location 2. The Poveglia Island, Italy's Island of the Damned. Poveglia Island in the Venetian Lagoon has the distinction of being both one of Europe's most haunted locations and one of its most deadly for visitors who ignore warnings and explore its abandoned structures. Since 1968, when the island was officially closed to public access, at least 47 people have illegally visited Poveglia and never returned, creating a disappearance rate so high that the Italian Coast Guard maintains permanent patrol boats around the island to prevent unauthorized landings. The island's dark history began in 1348, when it was used as a quarantine station for plague victims, eventually becoming a mass burial ground for over 160,000 people who died from the Black Death. In 1922, the island was converted into a mental hospital under the direction of Dr. Paolo Grimaldi, who conducted horrific experimental procedures on patients before allegedly going insane and throwing himself from the hospital's bell tower in 1968. The first documented modern disappearance occurred in 1979, when Italian paranormal researcher Dr. Marco Vincenti illegally landed on Poveglia with a team of assistants to investigate reports of supernatural activity. Local fishermen who transported the team reported seeing them enter the abandoned hospital building around sunset, but when they returned the next morning to collect them, they found only the researchers' equipment scattered throughout the hospital's main corridor. The most disturbing aspect of the Poveglia disappearances is that witnesses often report seeing the missing people for days or weeks after they vanish, but always as ghostly figures within the island's buildings. Fishermen regularly report seeing Dr. Vincenti and other missing researchers through the hospital windows, but these figures never respond to calls and seem unaware of attempts to communicate with them. Father Giuseppe Benedetti, who performed an unauthorized exorcism on Poveglia in 1985, documented experiencing what he called temporal displacement while exploring the island. His written account describes entering the hospital and finding it populated by patients and staff from the 1920s who seemed unaware of his presence. When he attempted to leave, he discovered that the hospital's layout had changed and he was unable to find exits that had been clearly visible upon entering. Benedetti managed to escape after 3 days of wandering through impossible hospital corridors that seemed to extend far beyond the building's actual dimensions, but he reported that time had passed differently on the island. What felt like 3 days to him had been 6 hours in the outside world. Italian authorities found him wandering the Venetian shoreline in a state of severe psychological trauma, speaking about being trapped in the past and claiming that the missing researchers were still alive but existing in different times. The Italian government has classified all documentation related to Poveglia Island and officially denies that disappearances have occurred there. But Coast Guard logs obtained through Freedom of Information requests show consistent patterns of unauthorized landings, followed by requests for search and rescue operations that are invariably unsuccessful. Location 3. Eastern State Penitentiary, Philadelphia's portal to hell. Eastern State Penitentiary in Philadelphia operated from 1829 to 1971 as one of America's most notorious prisons, housing over 75,000 inmates during its operational period. Since closing to prisoners and opening for historical tours, the facility has become the site of 23 documented disappearances of visitors, urban explorers, and paranormal investigators who ventured into restricted areas of the complex after official tour hours. The prison's supernatural reputation was established during its operational years, when inmates regularly reported encounters with apparitions, unexplained voices, and what they described as shadow people that would appear in cells and vanish when guards investigated. Prison records, obtained through Pennsylvania State Archives, document over 400 official incident reports of supernatural activity filed by guards and staff between 1950 and 1971. The first post-closure disappearance occurred in 1994 when urban explorer James Morrison illegally entered Eastern State Penitentiary through damaged perimeter fencing to photograph the deteriorating cell blocks. Morrison was an experienced explorer who always informed associates of his location and expected return time, but he failed to emerge from the penitentiary after a planned 4-hour exploration. Police search teams found Morrison's camera equipment in cell block 6, but the photographs recovered from his camera showed increasingly disturbing images as he progressed deeper into the prison. The final photographs appear to show Morrison taking pictures of empty cells that contained shadowy figures not visible to the naked eye, and the last image shows what appears to be a dark doorway in a wall where architectural plans indicate no doorway should exist. Philadelphia Police Department classified Morrison's case and suspended further investigations into Eastern State Penitentiary disappearances after 3 police officers went missing during a 2001 search operation. Officer testimonies from that operation, leaked by concerned colleagues, describe entering the prison and becoming disoriented by corridors that seemed to extend beyond the building's actual layout, hearing voices calling for help from areas that were structurally impossible to access. Dr. Karen Schultz, a paranormal researcher who has extensively studied Eastern State Penitentiary while maintaining strict safety protocols, documented that the prison exhibits dimensional instability in specific areas where most disappearances occur. Her electromagnetic field measurements show massive fluctuations in cell block 6 and the prison's solitary confinement section, suggesting what she calls reality distortions that could potentially transport people to alternate dimensions or time periods. The most disturbing evidence from Eastern State Penitentiary comes from security footage installed by the Historical Society, which has recorded individuals walking into specific areas of the prison and simply vanishing from view despite cameras positioned to cover all possible exit routes. The footage has been classified by Philadelphia authorities, but leaked segments show people taking normal steps forward and then disappearing mid-stride, as if they had walked through invisible doorways. Location 4. Aokigahara Forest, Japan's suicide forest turned supernatural trap. Aokigahara Forest at the base of Mount Fuji is internationally known as Japan's suicide forest due to the high number of people who enter it to end their lives. But what's less well known is that the forest also claims visitors who had no suicidal intentions whatsoever. Since 2000, Japanese authorities have documented 34 cases of hikers, photographers, and tourists who entered Aokigahara with clear plans to return and simply never emerged, despite extensive search operations by Japanese self-defense forces. The forest's supernatural characteristics were first documented in the 12th century when it was called Jukai, Sea of Trees, and considered a place where angry spirits of the dead would lure living people to join them. Modern investigations have confirmed that Aokigahara exhibits unusual properties that seem designed to trap visitors. Compasses spin wildly due to underground iron deposits. GPS devices malfunction consistently, and the forest's dense canopy creates an unnatural silence that disorients hikers and makes it difficult to determine direction. The first documented non-suicidal disappearance occurred in 2003 when professional nature photographer Hiroshi Tanaka entered Aokigahara to capture images of the forest's famous twisted trees for a photography exhibition. Tanaka was an experienced hiker who had explored forests throughout Japan and always followed strict safety protocols, including GPS tracking and scheduled check-ins with colleagues. Search teams found Tanaka's camera equipment and backpack arranged in a neat line along one of the forest's unofficial trails, but his camera's memory cards contained increasingly disturbing images showing what appeared to be human figures among the trees that were not visible to the naked eye when the photographs were taken. The final images showed Tanaka apparently following these ghostly figures deeper into the forest before the camera was abandoned. Japanese authorities classify most documentation related to non-suicidal Aokigahara disappearances, but leaked search and rescue reports describe operations where rescue teams themselves report feeling compelled to follow voices calling for help from deeper within the forest, even when logic indicated the voices were leading them away from their intended search areas. Dr. Yuki Nakamura, a folklore researcher who has studied Aokigahara's supernatural history, documented that the forest exhibits what she calls predatory haunting, paranormal activity that actively seeks to add new victims rather than simply frightening living people away. Her research shows that supernatural encounters in Aokigahara follow consistent patterns. Visitors report hearing voices calling for help, see ghostly figures gesturing for them to follow deeper into the forest, and experience overwhelming compulsions to abandon their planned routes and explore areas they had no intention of visiting. Location 5. Château de Brissac, France's Green Lady's hunting ground. Château de Brissac in France's Loire Valley has been home to the same noble family for over 500 years and is famous for its resident ghost known as La Dame Verte, the Green Lady, whose supernatural presence has evolved from harmless haunting to active predation. Since 1976, 7 visitors to the chateau have disappeared during overnight stays, leading to the permanent cancellation of the castle's guest accommodation services and restricted access to specific areas where the disappearances occurred. The chateau's supernatural activity was first documented in the 16th century when family records began reporting sightings of a woman in a green dress who would appear in guest bedrooms and corridors, always with a face described as hollow-eyed and terrifying. For centuries, the Green Lady was considered a benign presence who would occasionally frighten guests but cause no lasting harm, leading the family to treat her as an amusing ancestral curiosity. The situation changed dramatically in 1976 when British paranormal investigator Dr. Eleanor Cambridge arranged to spend a week at Château de Brissac to document supernatural activity. Dr. Cambridge was an experienced researcher who had investigated over 200 reportedly haunted locations throughout Europe and maintained detailed records of her investigations and safety protocols. Family members reported that Dr. Cambridge seemed increasingly agitated during her first few days at the chateau, claiming that the Green Lady was more active and aggressive than historical accounts suggested. On her 4th night at the castle, staff heard Dr. Cambridge screaming from her guest room, but when they arrived to investigate, they found the room empty with Dr. Cambridge's belongings undisturbed and no evidence of struggle or forced departure. The most disturbing aspect of Dr. Cambridge's disappearance was that chateau staff continued to see her throughout the castle for several weeks afterward, but always in the company of the Green Lady and appearing increasingly translucent and ghostly. These sightings eventually ceased, but subsequent paranormal investigators have reported seeing what appears to be Dr. Cambridge among a growing group of ghostly figures that accompany the Green Lady through the castle's corridors. French authorities have classified all official documentation related to Château de Brissac disappearances, but family records obtained through historical research show a pattern of the Green Lady's behavior becoming increasingly aggressive and territorial over the past 50 years. Recent visitors who have encountered the ghost report that she no longer simply appears and disappears, but actively pursues people through the castle and seems to be attempting to prevent them from leaving certain areas. The Château family has installed modern security systems throughout the castle, but cameras consistently malfunction in areas where the Green Lady is most active, and motion detectors record movement in patterns that suggest multiple entities moving together through areas where only one ghost was historically reported. Location 6. Waverly Hills Sanatorium, Kentucky's supernatural death trap. Waverly Hills Sanatorium in Louisville, Kentucky operated as a tuberculosis hospital from 1910 to 1961 and was the site of over 63,000 deaths during its operational period. Since closing as a medical facility, the building has become infamous among paranormal investigators, but it has also claimed the lives of 12 urban explorers and ghost hunters who entered the facility and never emerged, despite extensive search operations by Kentucky State Police. The sanatorium's supernatural reputation was established during its operational years, when staff regularly reported encounters with apparitions of deceased patients, unexplained medical equipment activation, and what they described as shadow figures that would appear in patient rooms and hospital corridors. Medical records from the facility document over 200 official reports of supernatural activity filed by doctors, nurses, and hospital staff. The first documented disappearance occurred in 1985 when paranormal researcher Dr. Michael Chen entered Waverly Hills with a team of investigators to document reported supernatural activity. Dr. Chen was an experienced researcher who had investigated over 100 reportedly haunted locations and always maintained strict safety protocols, including scheduled check-ins and emergency communication procedures. Search teams found Dr. Chen's equipment scattered throughout the sanatorium's 5th floor, but security footage from the investigation team showed increasingly disturbing activity as they progressed through the building. The final footage appears to show Dr. Chen and his team following what looks like a procession of ghostly figures toward the hospital's infamous death tunnel, a 500-foot underground passage used to discreetly remove deceased patients during the facility's operational period. Louisville Metro Police classified Dr. Chen's case after 2 police officers went missing during search operations in 1987. Officer reports from that investigation, leaked by concerned colleagues, describe entering the sanatorium and encountering patients and medical staff from different time periods who seemed unaware of current reality and would gesture for officers to follow them deeper into the building's lower levels. Dr. Sarah Williams, a paranormal researcher who has studied Waverly Hills while maintaining strict safety protocols, documented that the sanatorium exhibits what she calls temporal bleeding, areas where past and present time periods seem to overlap, potentially trapping visitors in historical time periods from the hospital's operational years. The most disturbing evidence from Waverly Hills comes from thermal imaging cameras that consistently record human-shaped heat signatures moving through areas of the building where no living people are present, suggesting that the disappeared individuals may still be present within the facility, but existing in altered states or time periods that make them undetectable through conventional search methods. The pattern of supernatural predation. When analyzing these 6 haunted locations where people actually disappear, a disturbing pattern emerges that suggests certain supernatural entities have evolved beyond passive haunting into active predation. These aren't traditional ghost sightings, where spirits simply appear and frighten living people. These are hungry supernatural forces that deliberately lure victims into dimensional voids, alternate time periods, or states of existence from which no one ever returns. The consistent elements across all 6 locations include documented histories of supernatural activity spanning centuries, official government recognition of the disappearances through classified investigations, witnesses who report seeing disappeared individuals as ghostly figures within the haunted locations, and search operations that are eventually suspended due to rescue teams themselves going missing. What makes these locations particularly dangerous is that the supernatural entities inhabiting them seem to have learned to mimic distress calls, create false doorways or passages that lead to dimensional traps, and manipulate visitors' perceptions to make them willingly walk into areas from which they cannot return. These aren't accidental disappearances. They're supernatural hunting behaviors by entities that have discovered how to add new victims to their ghostly populations. The institutional response. Governments acknowledge supernatural threats. The response of government agencies to these haunted locations reveals official recognition that certain supernatural threats cannot be handled through conventional law enforcement or search and rescue operations. Rather than dismissing the disappearances as accidents or hoaxes, governments have consistently chosen to classify investigations, restrict public access, and develop protocols for containing supernatural threats that exceed their ability to resolve. The pattern of institutional response suggests that government agencies understand these locations pose genuine supernatural dangers that conventional authorities cannot address effectively. The classification of investigation reports, permanent closure of access routes, and suspension of search operations indicate official acknowledgement that these haunted places have claimed victims through paranormal means that normal investigative procedures cannot explain or prevent. Law enforcement agencies have developed informal policies for handling haunted location disappearances, including immediate classification of evidence, reassignment of officers who report supernatural encounters, and coordination with undisclosed government departments that specialize in containment of paranormal threats rather than resolution of missing person cases. The human cost. Families destroyed by supernatural predation. The human cost of supernatural predation at these haunted locations extends far beyond the individuals who disappear. Families of the missing people suffer additional trauma because official investigations are classified, and they are denied access to evidence that might provide closure or understanding of what happened to their loved ones. Support groups for families affected by supernatural disappearances report consistent patterns of official stonewalling, denial of access to investigation files, and pressure to accept conventional explanations that don't match the evidence. Many families spend years pursuing private investigations that are systematically obstructed by authorities who possess classified information they cannot or will not share. The psychological impact on witnesses who observe people disappearing into haunted locations often requires extensive psychological support to prevent complete mental breakdown. These witnesses struggle with guilt over not preventing the disappearances and trauma from experiencing supernatural events that challenge their basic understanding of reality. The evidence is undeniable. These 6 haunted locations have claimed real victims through documented supernatural predation that government agencies acknowledge but cannot publicly address. From Romania's Hoia Baciu forest, where 200+ people have vanished into dimensional voids, to Italy's Poveglia Island, where missing researchers are seen as ghosts trapped in different time periods. These locations represent genuine supernatural threats that have evolved beyond traditional haunting into active hunting of human prey. The institutional response of classification and restricted access reveals that authorities recognize these paranormal dangers but lack the capability to resolve them, leaving families destroyed and locations permanently sealed from public access. Don't let them hide the truth that certain haunted places literally consume their visitors. Hit that subscribe button, smash that like button, and share this video with everyone who needs to know why these locations have been quietly removed from tourist maps and declared off limits by governments that refuse to explain the real reasons why.